Welcome to the debate, Body versus Wild, the science of surviving any emergency. Today we analyze the ideas from the book, The Inner Thermostat, Master Your Core, Master Survival. Imagine your car just dies on a deserted, snowy highway in the dead of winter.
Right. Worst case scenario.
Yeah, you have no cell service, the heater fades, and within about 45 minutes, your body is no longer fighting the environment. It is fighting itself in this microscopic, relentless battle to maintain a core temperature of exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit.
Because that narrow, non-negotiable threshold is, well, it's the operating system for human existence.
Exactly. When most people envision survival, they think of fending off bears or navigating by the stars. But facing sudden wilderness isolation or, say, a catastrophic urban grid failure, it ultimately boils down to this singular, silent struggle for thermoregulation.
Yep. If you drop a few degrees, your organs fail. If you spike a few degrees, your brain cooks. Every metabolic process, every enzymatic reaction hinges entirely on defending that precise number.
And that biological reality is the foundation of our discussion today. We are looking at the proposed field methods designed to maintain that core temperature under extreme duress. And I'll lay my cards on the table right away. While the biological science of thermoregulation we're debating is undeniably accurate, I find the practical field methods proposed to maintain it to be, well, incredibly dangerous.
Dangerous?
Absolutely. They are often overly idealized, highly energy-intensive, and carry hidden, compounding risks that could absolutely prove disastrous in the chaos of a real-world crisis. I'm looking at this through the lens of gritty, practical realism.
See, I come at it from a completely different perspective. I believe anchoring every single survival decision to that singular 98.6-degree imperative is deeply transformative.
Transformative how?
By simplifying the chaos of survival into actionable, logical protocols. From specific clothing layers to rigid mental frameworks, these methods offer an incredibly effective blueprint for staying alive. It shifts survival from a frantic game of chance into a disciplined application of physics.
Okay. Let's test that discipline against the physical environment then. The immediate battle is against the elements, right? If your internal furnace is constantly producing heat, the environment is constantly trying to steal it through conduction, touching cold surfaces, and convection, which is the wind pulling heat away.
Right.
So the proposed baseline solution is to create a microclimate, a shelter.
Yeah, and the logic here is brilliant in its simplicity. You don't heat the outdoors, right? You heat a tiny pocket of space. A shelter is fundamentally a thermal cocoon. The goal is to build a small, controlled pocket of air that you warm with your own body heat, and then you just trap it.
Right. Dead airspace.
Exactly. In the wild, the most effective way to do this is by utilizing dead air. Dead air is nature's best insulation because it stops convective currents. So the proposal is to build a debris hut. It's essentially an A-frame structure that you cover with 2 to 3 feet of densely packed natural debris, like pine needles, grass, dry leaves.
Wait, 2 to 3 feet thick? That is a massive amount of material.
It is, yeah. But that massive thickness is what creates the R value, the thermal resistance. It physically traps millions of microscopic pockets of air, completely halting conductive and convective heat loss. And actually, there is a perfect urban equivalent.
Oh, right, the car scenario.
Yeah. Go back to your scenario. Trapped in a parked car during a blizzard. That car is basically a giant metal heat sink. The cold metal will literally suck the warmth out of your body through conduction. But by layering discarded cardboard, which is full of corrugated dead airspace, inside the vehicle, lining the windows and the floor, you recreate that thermal cocoon. You sever the thermal bridge to the cold glass and metal.
Okay, I see the elegant physics of it on paper, but let's talk about the brutal reality of execution. I view this through the metaphor of an energy bank account. Think of your core temperature as a bank account, where your metabolic energy is the cash.
Okay, fair analogy.
Building a massive debris hut with 3 feet of packed leaves isn't a light chore. It requires immense, prolonged physical exertion. You are dragging logs. You are gathering literally hundreds of armfuls of wet leaves.
I actually tried building a debris hut in my backyard once just to see if I could.
Oh, really? How did it go?
After 20 minutes, I was completely exhausted. My heart was pounding and my shirt was completely drenched in sweat.
Well, sweating is just the body's natural evaporative cooling mechanism.
But in a winter survival scenario, it's a lethal one. You are spending $1,000 to pick up a penny. You are bankrupting your core heat through sweat to buy external insulation. Let's remember the old survival adage, cotton kills.
Right, because it absorbs moisture.
Exactly. If you are wearing a cotton base layer, that fabric absorbs your sweat like a sponge. It loses all those insulating air pockets you just talked about and becomes a thermal bridge itself. Wet clothing pulls heat away from the body up to 25 times faster than dry air. So doesn't the sheer grueling effort of building this quote-unquote ideal thermal cocoon risk triggering rapid hypothermia before you even finish the roof?
I mean, you're pointing out a real risk, yes. But failing to build the shelter guarantees thermoregulatory collapse. Without that barrier, the convective heat loss from the wind will strip away your warmth faster than you can ever generate it.
But the sweat?
Yes, sweating in cold weather is a critical danger, but the strategy is not to abandon the microclimate. The strategy is to rigorously manage your exertion. You have to pace yourself. You manage your microclimate while you work by stripping off your outer shell, venting your heat, and putting it back on when you rest.
Okay, but pacing yourself assumes a level of objective, robotic calm that completely vanishes when your adrenaline is spiking. You are racing against a setting sun, the snow is falling harder, the primitive brain takes over, and the instinct is to work frantically to get a roof over your head.
Which is exactly why understanding the 98.6-degree imperative changes the game.
How so?
Because when you internalize that sweating is mathematically just as dangerous as a snowstorm, you force yourself to slow down. The physical laws of the universe do not care that you are panicked. They don't care that it's getting dark. If you rush and sweat through your base layer, you die. Understanding that rule is what forces the behavioral change.
Well, the fatal flaw in pacing yourself to avoid sweat, though, is that it assumes you have the biological resources to sustain that exertion over a longer period. Evaporative cooling, sweating, bankrupts your fluid levels, which brings us directly to the actual coolant of the human engine, which is water.
Exactly. Blood is largely composed of water, and it acts as your physiological radiator fluid.
Right.
When your core temperature rises from hauling logs, your heart pumps that water-rich blood to the surface of your skin, where the sweat glands release it. As that sweat evaporates, it physically carries thermal energy away into the air.
Right. And when you lose that water, your blood literally thickens. It turns the sludge. Your blood volume drops, and the heart has to strain incredibly hard just to circulate it.
Yeah, the cooling system shuts down.
And your core temperature skyrockets into hyperthermia if you're in the heat, or you lose the ability to circulate warm blood to your extremities if you're in the cold. So the biology is clear, but let's look at the proposed field methods for securing that water.
Okay.
Drought, or building a solar still by digging a massive pit, throwing green vegetation in it, and using a plastic sheet to catch ground condensation.
And those are brilliant, elegant applications of basic science. They leverage the passive energy of the sun. The sun hits the leaves in the bag. The leaves essentially sweat through transpiration. The moisture condenses on the plastic, and it drips down into a collection point. It extracts purified water without requiring you to expend the calories to hike 5 miles looking for a contaminated stream.
I am highly skeptical of this because of the extreme disparity between what the body physiologically demands and the actual microscopic yield of these methods.
Microscopic?
Yes. What are the risks of relying on these passive sources? Let's look at the numbers. A mere 1 to 2% loss of body weight in water causes noticeable cognitive decline. A 5% deficit severely reduces physical performance and causes muscle weakness.
Well, all the more reason to set up passive collection systems immediately, before that deficit hits.
But a solar still, even under ideal desert conditions, might yield, 3 or 4 ounces of water after 8 hours of waiting? Digging a 3-foot pit for a solar still in hard-packed, rocky earth will cost you 16 ounces of sweat just to excavate the hole.
That assumes you're digging in the heat of the day, though.
Even so, you are operating at a massive physiological deficit. Isn't it a dangerous psychological trap to treat these as viable survival methods? A person suffering from a 3% fluid loss might sit next to a plastic bag tied to a branch, actively deteriorating, believing they have solved their water problem. In reality, they're just watching 3 drops of water accumulate while their kidneys begin to strain.
I think that is a fundamental misunderstanding of survival economics. It's not a trap, because you don't use a solar still to replace a gallon of tap water. You use it to buy time.
Buy time?
Yes, the real aha moment here is that survival isn't about maintaining your everyday comfort. It's an agonizing economics game of microtransactions. You aren't trying to hydrate so you feel refreshed. You are trying to stave off the critical 10% deficit that leads to organ failure.
But you're buying those 6 hours at the cost of the energy it took to set it up.
Not if you overlap your strategies. You collect dew with your shirt in the early morning by dragging it through the grass and wringing it out. You set up a transpiration bag by noon. You catch condensation. It is the cumulative effect of these micro yields.
I guess I see the cumulative aspect.
Furthermore, the act of setting up a passive system forces you to stop and rest in the shade while it works. You are actively halting your own metabolic heat production and stopping further evaporative loss. The yield is small, but it is pure, safe water that requires zero ongoing caloric expenditure.
That brings up a critical point, though. You mentioned buying cognitive function. That 1 to 2% water deficit doesn't just make your muscles tired, it attacks the exact part of the brain you need to execute these rigid survival plans. It impairs short-term memory, concentration, and executive function. And that forces us to confront the psychological reality of these protocols. We are talking about meticulously pacing shelter building to avoid a sweat cascade and calculating the energetic return on investment of a solar still. All of this requires supreme psychological discipline.
It absolutely does. The mind is the ultimate layer of insulation. All the space blankets and waterproof gear in the world are utterly useless if fear dictates your actions.
Right, because of the physical reaction to fear.
Exactly. Panic triggers the sympathetic nervous system. Your adrenaline spikes, your heart rate accelerates, and you start taking rapid, shallow breaths. All of that frantic physiological noise is burning precious calories and generating erratic movements that shed heat into the wind.
And the proposed solution for this is a cognitive framework, the STOP framework. Stop, think, observe, plan.
Yes, it is a rigid, structured mental algorithm designed to manually override the physiological stress response. The very first step, stop, literally means sitting down, halting all physical movement. You use deep, diaphragmatic breathing to manually calm the nervous system.
Let's break down the mechanics of that, because it sounds a bit like survival meditation. How does breathing keep you warm?
Well, it's not spiritual, it's chemical. When you are terrified, your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline, preparing you to sprint away from a predator. But you can't sprint away from a blizzard. That chemical dump makes you jittery and burns metabolic energy at a massive rate.
So the breathing intercepts that?
Exactly. By engaging the diaphragm with deep, measured breaths, you stimulate the vagus nerve. That sends a signal to the brain to downregulate the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight response, and activate the parasympathetic nervous system.
Oh, wow.
You physically lower your heart rate, you shut off the adrenaline drip. By consciously forcing yourself to observe your environment and plan a deliberate sequence of actions, you prevent that massive, unnecessary expenditure of core heat. You are literally saving your core temperature by controlling your breath and your thoughts.
I understand the mechanism, but I really want to ground this in what actually happens to the human body in the cold. I question the realism of cognitive reframing when the body is actively entering a state of physiological collapse.
Okay.
Let's talk about the 95-degree threshold. When your core temperature drops to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, you cross into clinical hypothermia.
Right, the shivering response peaks.
It doesn't just peak, it becomes violently uncontrollable. The body initiates peripheral vasoconstriction. It clamps down the blood vessels in your arms and legs to shunt all the warm blood back to your vital organs. You completely lose the use of your hands. And crucially, biology overrides psychology.
In what sense?
At 95 degrees, The body literally starves the prefrontal cortex, your logic and reasoning center, of warm blood to keep the heart beating. This is why hypothermic people get the umbles. They stumble, mumble, and fumble. A profound apathy sets in.
Right.
My question is, can a person freezing in an unheated apartment during a multi-day blackout realistically execute a structured STOP analysis? When you are chemically incapable of complex thought because your brain is freezing, doesn't biology simply win?
Well, biology wins if you let it get to 95 degrees. That is exactly why the STOP framework and the practice of mental thermoregulation must be deployed before you cross that threshold.
Before?
Yes. The entire premise of mastering the inner thermostat is preventative. If you wait until you are uncontrollably shivering, dropping things, and staring blankly at the wall to try and formulate a plan, you have already lost the battle.
But emergencies don't always give you a warning. I mean, you might fall through the ice. The power grid might fail instantly during a polar vortex while you are asleep. You wake up in a crisis.
Even in a sudden shock, the seconds immediately following the realization are the ones that matter. The primitive instinct is to thrash, to run, to exert energy in a blind panic, trying to fix everything at once.
Right, fight or flight.
But if you have trained the STOP framework into your baseline response, you take that deep breath in that exact moment of shock. You don't wait for hypothermia to set in, you stop. You acknowledge the apartment is going to become a freezer. You plan.
So you're acting before the drop.
Exactly. You insulate the windows, you rip up the cardboard boxes to build the microclimate we talked about earlier, you put on your merino wool base layer before your core temperature ever drops a single degree.
I hear you, but that requires an exceptional level of prior training. In a real-world scenario, people freeze, not just physically, but mentally. The cognitive overload is paralyzing.
Sure.
If a person's brain is already degrading from the fear or, a 2% water deficit, asking them to rationally calculate the R value of their available debris feels like asking someone to solve a calculus equation while running full speed on a treadmill.
I completely see the challenge there. It is incredibly difficult. But the alternative is surrendering to the elements. What the science of survival shows us is that the will to live isn't some mystical, cinematic aura. It is a neurologically rooted drive that can be hacked.
Hacked how?
By focusing on a highly specific mechanical goal, like, I need to trap air to stop convective heat loss. You give it degrading brain a singular, tangible anchor. It cuts through the fog of panic. You don't have to do calculus. You just have to remember the rule, layers trap heat, wind steals it. Go build a pocket of air.
That concept, giving a panicked brain a singular mechanical anchor, is a profound way to look at it. And I think it brings us back to the core tension of this entire discussion. We have this undeniable, beautifully complex biological science of the 98.6 degree imperative. We know exactly what the human engine needs.
Yes.
But the execution of these protocols under intense physiological stress is a gritty, exhausting, and perilous reality where every action has an immediate cost.
It's the ultimate accounting game, and the currency is your life.
Exactly. So, looking back at the ideas from the inner thermostat, I have to conclude that while the science of heat production and loss is flawless, the methods themselves must be approached with intense critical filtering. Listeners need to recognize the extreme risks.
Caution is definitely required.
Yes, you need a microclimate, but attempting complex wilderness construction without precise pacing can trigger a sweat cascade that kills you. Digging a massive hole for a tiny amount of water might bankrupt your hydration. Sometimes, the very acts you take to prevent thermoregulatory collapse can violently accelerate it if you aren't rigorously managing your exertion.
And my conclusion remains that these methods are absolute must-try fundamentals. Yes, the execution is incredibly unforgiving, but the framework is infallible.
Infallible is a strong word.
But it's true. By rigorously passing every single decision you make, from what specific fabric you put on your body, to when you take a sip of water, to how quickly you walk across a field, through the singular lens of core temperature maintenance, you eliminate the guesswork.
Right.
You eliminate the panic. You align your actions with the uncompromising laws of physics. And that gives you the ultimate strategic advantage in any environment, whether it's urban or wild.
It really does leave us with a stark realization. We are incredibly finely tuned, fragile machines.
When the grid fails or the trail disappears, the external world stops functioning, but that internal engine has to keep running. Every single degree lost or gained is a literal step toward or away from survival.
It forces us to ask hard questions about our own readiness.
It does. Ultimately, we all have to weigh these biological realities and determine our own approach to crisis preparedness. True survival mastery requires a continuous, honest exploration of our own limits, long before they are ever put to the test.
Well said. It starts before the crisis.
Thank you for joining us for this analysis. The silent battle for 98.6 degrees never stops. The only question is, are you prepared for the moment you have to fight it alone?